This is Shekhar Narasimhan. I'm chair and founder of the AAPI Victory Fund. We have Senator Kamala Harris with us. We have Richard Lieu, who's with NBC, who's going to be MSNBC, and he's going to be moderating this discussion. We will be joined shortly by Congressman Ted Lieu. So I'm going to make a few brief remarks and then hand it over to Richard and let him carry the conversation. So on behalf of the AAPI Victory Fund, we are pleased to host this event. And the purpose was to lift up two topics that are top of mind for the Asian American Pacific Islander community. The first is to address head-on the increase in hate crimes and xenophobia created by Donald Trump against Asian Americans. And I know everyone on this call is familiar with that, but we're certainly going to hear more, not just about what it is, but also what we can do about it. And the second purpose is really how to determine our response, particularly at the polls in November, to get rid of Donald Trump and all his enablers. It's something I wake up every morning thinking about, and I have a feeling a number of you do as well. For those of you who are not familiar with the AAPI Victory Fund, we were formed in 2016 with the singular aim to expand the AAPI electorate. We kept getting told by the pollsters that we were the fastest growing minority group in the country. But when we looked at the numbers, we were undervoting the general population by 16 points. So we were leaving an awful lot of votes on the table. We felt that we could help to firmly make this into a significant voting bloc for progressives across the country. And we've made real progress. In 2018, AAPIs increased their participation by a greater margin, 52%, than any other ethnic group compared to the previous midterms. So something had changed. And what it has really been, in no small part, is to the unleashing of energy by grassroots groups and all of you from across the country who see the threat posed by Donald Trump and his enablers. But you also see this huge opportunity to build a better America. Our major annual AAPI Heritage Month Summit is planned for May 18th and will include many special guests and celebrities. Hello, Congressman, welcome. Nice to see you. So please plan to come on May 18th. You'll get notice from us and participate virtually in that too. We're expecting an absolutely phenomenal event for a variety of reasons. While Zoom is not the perfect way to communicate, it's turned out to be a way that we can talk to a very large number of people at the same time, and we can be inspirational in doing so. And it is therefore my pleasure to introduce to you those who will be your inspiration today. Senator Kamala Harris from California, who's a champion for equal rights and justice. Senator, your mother also came from my mother's hometown, by the way. So we do have something, we might even be related in some way.
We probably are. You look like half my family.
There you go, exactly. Congressman Ted Lieu from the 33rd District in Southern California. And Ted, you should know I read your Twitter feed every day because you actually write this yourself, and somehow you always manage to get under Donald Trump's skin. And boy, that gives me great joy, as I hope and assume that it does for you as well. But you're serious. This is a very serious group of leaders. To moderate the special event, we have the esteemed and well-known Richard Lieu, news anchor at MSNBC, who's been a great friend. Let me hand it off to Richard, and thank you all very much for being here.
Okay, virtual clap. Thank you, Shekhar. Senator, thank you so much for being here. Representative, I believe that you have that little mute button on, maybe because you got some kids running around right now, but we'd love to hear you as well as see you. Perfect, perfect. Say something, Representative.
Hi, sorry I was a little bit behind. I was on a Democrat caucus conference call that lasted a little longer, but appreciate you have me here.
Those things, yeah, you know, they kind of move on. Hey, thank you. This is a very important topic because it's not an easy one, but we have two interlocutors here that can really put their arms around it and communicate what's happening on the ground, as well as what we can do in community and in policy. So Senator, I want to start with you and what you're hearing. I know that you're in Washington, D.C. right now. The question might be, as the great state of California, where I happen to hail from, it might be a little bit biased towards, at least by heart. How is it being described right now? This dynamic, unfortunately, of people not getting along simply because of the idea that one group is causing COVID today.
Well, let's call it what it is. It's hate crime, and it's rooted in racism. And the reality is that a crisis always highlights what were disparities or injustices before, and it makes them bigger. And so we've seen racial disparities in terms of how it is hitting people in terms of the health impact of the coronavirus. We're seeing racial disparities around the economic impact, and we're seeing hate crimes increase against Asian Americans in California and the rest of the country. In fact, while 1,886 Asian Americans are known to have died from COVID-19 through Monday, April 27th, 271 Asian American deaths were in California, representing 17.3% of all deaths in a state where Asians comprise 14.5% of the population. So that's an example of what we're talking about in terms of the proportionality and frankly the disproportionality in terms of the health impact of the virus. The economic impact, well, we know that we have approximately 2 million Asian American owned businesses. Three types in particular are the most prevalent: hospitality, which includes tourism and food services; 2, wholesale trade; and 3, hair, nail, and skincare, all of which are being impacted profoundly because of the failures of this administration to appropriately administer the Small Business Administration's responsibility for getting money to real small businesses. We have seen that there has been in Asian American businesses a drop in customers as high as 80% drop in customers, long before the country pushed social isolation. So again, Richard, the point there is that the stigmatization, the racism, again, let's call it what it is, has resulted in an impact both in terms of disparities around the healthcare system from before, to the economic impact of the COVID-19 virus, and then hate crimes specifically. I, as a prosecutor, and I'm so glad to be with my friend Ted Lieu. We've been working together for over a decade. He and I have talked about hate crime for so many years, and the reality there is, again, it is based on longstanding racism. We can go back to the fact that Chinese Americans built the railroads. We can go back to the fact that even in San Francisco and in the Bay Area, Chinese Americans were for so long prevented legally from owning property, and just take it through. And so what we have today is a president of the United States who uses the voice that should be a voice of bringing people together and lifting people up to continue to with his agenda of attempting to divide the people of the United States based on race and based on status. And so, in fact, I have a bill that is together with Mazie Hirono in the United States Senate to address this, both in terms of calling it what it is and collecting data about the racial impact, in particular as it relates to the AAPI community, but also the prosecution of these cases, investigation and prosecution of these cases. The challenge that we have there is that, as with so many immigrant communities, we are used to this. And so people don't necessarily report what is happening because it's just something that happens that we know has happened. So part of the challenge is we have to encourage people to report these crimes when they occur. And we have to encourage people to know that it is not about them trying to bring attention to themselves, because that's not necessarily what people want to do culturally, but it's about bringing attention to an issue that affects the whole country. But that in a nutshell is how I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, the cultural dynamic that you brought up, Senator, is so clear and can't be easily described. And the frustration is that when we've seen some of the images, and they're very painful, of many of those who are older experiencing this. And I just cannot, and I think all of us on this call on these 3 screens, as well as those who have joined us, and thank you all that are here today, by the way, for this conversation, is we cannot help but think of that were to be our uncle, our auntie, our mom, our father, and the emotion that wells up. So to you, Representative, I know that you also, like the senator does, has very personal as well as very professional views on this problem that we're facing right now, which is anti-Asian hate crime right now.
First of all, thank you, Richard, for taking your time to moderate this event. And it's my honor to be on with Senator Harris, who has done amazing work both in California as well as now in the U.S. Senate. And specifically to your question, different minority groups in America experience somewhat different kinds of discrimination. And so Asian Americans do have a particular susceptibility to basically the view that we're not American, or that we're foreigners, we're not part of this country. And when the president uses terms like the Chinese virus, when people execute hate crimes on Asian Americans, it feeds into that kind of discrimination, that somehow we're second-class citizens, we're not part of this great nation. And so we just all need to fight back on it. And when we do, it does have an effect. So you have noticed that the president has dramatically slowed down or stopped using the term Chinese virus in his press conferences and in his statements. And it's helpful when different organizations, people in the grassroots community and elected officials do speak out. And then in terms of legislation, a number of jurisdictions already have hate crimes legislation, hate crimes laws in place. So it's a matter of making sure that they are prosecuted. And glad that Senator Harris mentioned that bill. We'll look to see if we do a companion bill in the House.
Senator, how do you see the outcome of the bill that you will be pushing forth, and how do you see implementation of it?
I'm very hopeful. If anybody knows Senator Mazie Hirono, she is a force. She and I serve together on Senate Judiciary and are often, leaning back in our chairs, whispering to each other about why we need to really fight. So I feel optimistic about it. Implementation, I think you're absolutely right. And it has to be about putting the pressure on agencies, including the Department of Justice, who I've talked with about this issue, and so many others. The Department of Homeland Security, I've talked with them about it too, because let's also remember that when we're talking about hate crimes, we do have also a significant number of people from who are AAPI who are undocumented. And so when we're looking at the biases around enforcement strategies, we want to make sure also that ICE and the Department of Homeland Security is not informing its enforcement strategies and policies based on this ridiculous bias that has been spewed by the president and this misinformation that has been spewed by the president. So, but the enforcement piece of it and the implementation is going to be about all of the powerful folks who are on this call right now advocating for immediate implementation. And then again, I can't stress enough, maybe as a former prosecutor, the importance of really reminding our family members, our community members, of the importance of reporting. And the Attorney General of New York actually created a hotline. The FBI has talked about this after the Texas case. And so requiring that local, state, and federal law enforcement also make it easy for people to report, such as providing a hotline so that this information can be handled by people who understand the nature of the crime and also understand how to address it in a culturally competent way. But those are some of the questions. Yeah.
Just for those who may be joining us now, in terms of the structure of our call, you can clearly see we have Senator Kamala Harris as well as Congressman Ted Lieu. We're here to talk about anti-Asian hate crime, the issue, how to combat it legislatively, as well as tactics on the ground. We're about to get into storytelling and media and what that can do as part of changing the culture that surrounds this problem today. We're going to get to some questions and answers. There's a little button, and many of you have already gone there at the bottom, says Q&A, and you can put your questions in there, and we will try to get to some of them a little bit later. We're going to talk a little bit longer for about another 10 or 15 minutes and get to those. So thanks to all of you who are here. That was a quick pull-up, if you will. Representative, I was just looking at A3PCon, which both of you are familiar with, which is one of the places that is measuring the number of hate incidents. And in their press release that came out, not too long ago, I think about 10 days ago, they had counted almost 1,500 reports in about a month's time. And 58% of them, according to their press release, hate incidents, 58% happened in California and New York specifically. What are some of the ideas, Representative, that you like to tell your constituents, as well as when you are in the often location of talking to a lot of different people, like on TV, sometimes that group back there? What's the message you put out?
So the Asia Pacific Policy and Planning Council is a great organization, and they've been tracking hate crimes across America. They did report that in the week after the president used the term Chinese virus, they saw a surge of 650 hate crimes across our nation. And that's one reason I did write an op-ed in the Washington Post calling the president out on this. It is very important for people to speak up, partly because this pandemic has affected all Americans, and the issue of hate crimes is not something that most Americans are walking around thinking on their top 10 list of issues. Sometimes they are not aware of what language could do and what is actually happening to Asian Americans. So for people to simply raise this issue, whether it's in the media or for elected officials to raise it with their constituents, and for organizations to raise it with the American public, is very important, just to make people aware. And a lot of times, just when I talk to people, make them aware, they're like, oh, I never thought about it that way. And so I think simply raising awareness is important, and continuing to put pressure on people who do want to keep using terms like Chinese virus and so on, that this virus knows no boundaries. It affects everyone regardless of ethnicity. And right now, what we need to deal with is making sure we get much more testing in America and to get PPE out to our hospitals and our frontline responders.
Yeah, and you bring up a great idea there, Senator, to you on this, and that is that this may be about the AAPI community, but really is about America. Yeah. It really is about so many bigger ideas about what we stand for and what we've seen and we fought before. And as much as all of us on this call are AAPI, we can't but help but think what it says about everything else. You know, when I'm on the show with Reverend Al Sharpton, which both of you have been on, when I think of why my father became a pastor because of MLK, these are all people working together to try to stop something. And to you then, Senator, as we think about the idea of the Tri-Caucus and what that represents to America, working together again, how can we work together to combat this culture right now that is fomenting of hate right now?
Yeah, I mean, Richard, you hit it on the head. We have a person who occupies the White House who has spent full time from campaigning for president to being in office to sow hate and division among us. And what we all know, and especially all of us given our backgrounds, what we know is that the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. And especially in terms of our core values and our priorities and our dreams and our hopes. And so it is important that we continue to do that, and then do that through coalition building, which is all of the friends in the room together saying that an injustice against any one of us is an injustice against all of us. All of the friends in the room together saying, no one should be made to fight alone. We are all in this together. And there has to be a commitment to that, knowing that that is not only the right value that we as human beings should have, but that is at the core of what is the promise of America. And if we are to achieve that promise, we've not achieved it yet, by the way, but if we are to achieve the ideals of our country, we're gonna have to fight to get there. And doing what we're talking about, which is to fight against hate crime, to fight against bigotry, to fight against xenophobia, to fight against racism. That is the fight of a patriot. That is the fight of somebody who loves our country and believes in the ideals that we have purported to be the goal. And that's how I think about it. But I can't stress enough that we also have to deal with the immediate nature of this in terms of these hate crimes, and do everything we can to remind, a lot of us who have Asian backgrounds, our families know our grandparents would talk to us about duty, right? and our responsibility. And we have to remind people that duty includes the duty to report for the sake of the community, because so many just culturally were raised that, you know, it's like the onion, and, you know, there are many layers to society, and we're at in the core, and then there are all these other layers that are priorities over us. And we have to remind people that on this issue of hate crime, the priority is to make sure it's reported. And so the signal can go out that when it occurs, there's going to be consequence and accountability. And on that point, I want to just give everybody the website for the FBI. It's www.fbi.gov/tips, TIPS. And let's get that information out to folks who need it, so that we can make sure that we're keeping the data, to Ted's point, to the Congressman's point, so that this is not just about each one of us giving anecdotal information, but we're collecting the data. And that's part of the reason behind the bill that Senator Hirono and I have, and that Congressman Lieu is working on.
Yes, this can be a very ugly onion, as you described, Senator, but it also can be a very sweet onion. And Congressman Ted Lieu, let's talk about that sweetness. You both hail from the most diverse state in America by numbers in many ways. What have you seen when you think about your Latino and Latina brothers and sisters, your African-American brothers and sisters, your Native American brothers and sisters, and how they've worked together either at your level or in the communities that you represent, that has inspired you in terms of how we can combat? Because again, one is all.
Yeah.
That's a great point. By the way, I know that in the House, we now call it the Quad Caucus, because we do have the first 2 Asian American females in Congress. And so we have Native American caucus as well. And we see that this pandemic, first of all, it affects all Americans, but it also affects particular ethnic groups disproportionately. So we see rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans. And then among Latinos and African Americans, we see disproportionate deaths from this virus. And we also see that the Native American community is disproportionately affected also with disproportionate deaths as well. And so we have a lot of challenges addressing this pandemic. We want to make sure that we can address the healthcare disparities, and also make sure that we don't have such disparity in outcomes from people who get affected by this virus. And the caucuses, the minor caucuses, have worked together very well, both in the House as well as bicamerally. And just a quick anecdote, we had an issue related to, you may remember a few years ago, where the FBI would arrest people for espionage. There was a Professor Shi that was arrested for alleged espionage. There was a federal employee named Sherry Chen who was alleged to have engaged in espionage. And then many months later, all their charges were dropped. As we looked into this, there were about 4 or 5 cases in a given year that happened. And the only thing that was the same is all the defendants have to be Asian American. And so we worked together and worked with the Justice Department and did press conferences, op-eds, and we met with the Attorney General. And they made 2 changes. They said, we're going to have a new rule where all these cases will be reviewed one more time in their DC office. And then they ordered implicit bias training for every member of the department, which shows that there was a recognition that there is either conscious or unconscious discrimination happening. And so if we just speak up, and that was an effort with all the caucuses. And we did 2 letters, and the 2 letters were signed by the leaders of all the caucuses. And so it shows the power of working together.
And that is great. The Quad Caucus, and again, golly, you know, go away for a week, look what happens. That's great. So I want to move to one important thing, because as we look forward, there's something called the census and something called Get Out the Vote. We already have a community, the AAPI community, not unique to them, but especially potentially acute in getting out the vote and getting folks to say, yes, I'm an American, I'm in America. Senator, with this unfortunate wrapper around those 2 very pinnacle events this year, what would you suggest to those who are considering, on the fence, and what are some of the bigger ideas around this?
Yeah, I'm really glad you raised this. So I have some statistics to share. Facts. So the Census Bureau released a study in 2019, January, that AAPIs are the least likely to participate in the census of any racial group. Only 55% of AAPIs as compared to 69% of whites, 65% of Latinos, 64% of African Americans. And the reason, at least the analysis suggests, is that one, when we look at immigrant status, our AAPIs are disproportionately represented among immigrants who arrived in the United States after 2010, right? And remember, the census happens every 10 years. So there's no tradition of doing the census or familiarity with the census among those more recent immigrants, and then limited English proficiency. And so, and which is for the AAPI community, 35% speak English, quote, less than very well, right? So these are the two issues. And again, this gets back to the point about the leaders who are on this, who are participating this afternoon on our call, which is reminding people that the census happens only once every 10 years, which is a lifetime.
Yes.
And it is on the basis of the census, which is basically counting who's here, right? It is on the basis of the census that the decision will be made about how many federal dollars go to which communities for things like their public schools, things like Medicaid, Head Start. And so let's remind everyone that they will actually either receive the resources or not, depending on if they participate. And the census is supposed to be anonymous. They're running TV commercials recently, you know, showing a box and a lockbox and a safe that the rules are that the Census Bureau is not to share information with other agencies. And, you know, the inference there is in particular ICE and Border Patrol.
Right.
But we have to make sure everyone is counted. And we know that a lot of our immigrant families, AAPI, Latino, and others, live in blended households where some members of the family are documented, some are undocumented. And again, with the increase of hate crimes and this anti-immigrant rhetoric out of Donald Trump, a lot of people are just afraid to answer the door. Well, the beauty of 2020 versus 2010, many more people have access to the internet. So they can actually, instead of waiting for someone to knock on the door and answering the door to give them the information, people can go online to do it. So we want to encourage people to go online to participate in the census. It is so important that everyone is counted.
Yes, Congressman Lieu, building on what the senator said here, one of the things that come to mind is the last census, what do we hear? Fastest growing segment in America, right? That's after 2010. Reason being is there was a lot of folks getting out the, if you will, census. Go and count, be counted. Because corner offices, business corner offices, your representative, they're hearing that too. And when they hear it's the fastest growing group, they say, oh, maybe we need to address that group with our marketing. Maybe we need to put them into these advertisements. Maybe we need to have them seen in media. And reflect on that idea, but I'm going to the media point because there's a couple of campaigns that are coming out this week relevant to anti-Asian hate crime. There's one, Faces of the Cure, that came out yesterday, trying to show some of the amazing AAPI faces that are doing something to, you know, save all of the souls that have been saved so far. There's something called All Americans, a push of a very much a quad caucus approach here, all different folks of different backgrounds, actors, relevant voices saying, we're all American in this together. Let's not make these distinctions right now. Talk about the media and business and what they can do, Representative, to do something to affect the culture that we're talking about today.
That's a great question. In Britain, there was a beautiful video that came out that showed the frontline responders, and they had Asians and Latinos and Africans and others. And then after a while, you realize that's all they had. And then you realize what they were doing is they were showing immigrants in Britain that were on the front lines of fighting this pandemic. So I reached out to Brave New Films, which is Robert Greenwald. He does these amazing videos. They're going to work on something like that. And so I think if we got out videos of basically all their immigrants out there on the front lines fighting this pandemic, I think that would be helpful. I think doing one on Asian Americans on the front lines fighting this pandemic would also be helpful as well. And simply again, highlighting this issue to the American public, I think is very, very important. All of us on this call are very aware of this issue. We get directly affected by it. My parents, for example, they're elderly. Not only are they scared to go out because they don't want to get this virus, but they're actually scared of getting harassed or potentially assaulted because they read these stories about these hate crimes. And then with your reference about the census and population, it is absolutely true that the more, in terms of percentage of population there is, the greater power there is. And it is good to see that last decade, APIs were the fastest rising ethnic group. We also know from a Pew Research report that recently came out that this November, an astounding 1 in 10 voters are immigrants. And so you see a rising number of immigrants across the board, of which the AAPI population is now 31%. Latinos are 34%. So you're seeing a very quick rise in Asian Pacific Americans. And then what we saw in 2019 is there was a crossover now in terms of immigrants coming over the United States. It used to be the largest group were from Latin America. We now see that immigrants from Asia now outpace every single other ethnic group coming into America. And that just started occurring in 2019. So what you're gonna see, I think, is another decade of a surge in Asian Pacific Islander immigration in the United States. And hopefully the census will reflect that, and we need to make sure that it accurately does so. So all the different organizations are working on this. It's very important that we continue to reach out. Instead of knocking on people's doors, you just have to do it through phone, through text, through emails, but it's critically important we get everybody to sign up for the census.
And Richard, to add one point to the Congressman's point about who the first responders are. It's estimated that at least 200,000 DACA recipients are among those who are the critical workers during this pandemic. And I saw a number of at least over 30,000 of which are in the public health direct delivery of service area of the response. So it's important, again, to show the faces of who is actually saving lives in America during the biggest crisis that we've faced in a long time.
Yeah, and again, there's that campaign, Faces of the Cure, that's just started this week from, I believe, C100, which I'm associated with, as well as All Americans. Another campaign trying to say, hey, we're influencers, let's get together on this. Guess what? It is Q&A time, and we got a lot to squeeze in, so I thank you both for your patience to this, and all of you out there who have asked questions. We're combing through them, and we're trying to get the best of them, or all of them if we can. So this is the first question, and in what ways would you fight for AAPI interests, such as diversity in high-level appointments? Very important, right? Pipeline, decision makers. Senator, you first, and then Representative.
Well, this has been a huge issue for me ever since I held my first elected office as DA of San Francisco. I know that in the Senate, I'm proud to tell you that I have the largest number of ethnic minorities, 70% of my staff, actually. And in fact, my chief of staff and my deputy chief of staff were both AAPI when I first came in.
What are you doing, Senator? That's upside down.
Well, it's about giving everyone access. It's about giving everyone access. And as in the Senate, I introduced what we call the Ensuring Diverse Leadership Act with a lot of others. And it was about just saying, look, we have to recognize that the decisions being made I'll speak for the Senate side, and I'm sure Ted will speak on the House side, but in what's called the most deliberative body in the world, the United States Senate, we have to make sure that the decisions that are being made are actually relevant to the people who will be affected by those decisions. And as we all know, the importance of diversity is the importance of making sure that we are relevant, making sure that we are inclusive, making sure in a representative government that is supposed to be a democracy, that at every level, including the leaders of the democracy, reflect the faces and the names and the experiences of the people. And so it couldn't be more important. And I think that it's, all of us should have it as a priority, not just people who look like me or look like the congressman, but I know that through the Quad Caucus and the work that we've been doing throughout, we're pushing our colleagues who may have different backgrounds than ours And there's been a great receptiveness to it, but there's still a lot more work to be done, no question.
Representative, yeah, thank you. Representative.
All of you are on this call because you believe that a government that looks more like the people it represents is a stronger, more resilient government. And I know Senator Harris believes that deeply. And if any of you know of anyone who's interested in a political appointment or a judicial appointment, let us know. And if they're qualified, we will help them. And this is at all levels of government. I've written letters for people who are applying for positions in the state as well as in the federal government. And it's not partisan. So if there's someone who's interested in working in the Trump administration, I've also written letters for minority candidates as well. If you're qualified and you're good, we want you in government. And it's very important that you feel free to contact us or have people contact us because we will help them. And second, I note that the caucuses are asked by presidential administrations to essentially provide a list of people that they think they could look into for various positions within government. And so in the next transition, hopefully it will be Senator Biden, be President Biden. The Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus will in fact submit a list to the administration and say, hey, here are these folks that we think are eminently qualified. Please take a look at them for your various positions within government. And all the caucuses will do that.
Great. Senator, I want to ask you about something that both of you had intimated or head nodded towards, and that is our very important AAPI businesses, small but very, very plentiful in number all across the country. They're being affected to a great deal because of this dynamic of anti-Asian hate. What was your response to how to deal with that, you think?
So we have now passed a couple of bills, none of which have been sufficient to address the need. But in the moment of crisis, it's what we needed to push out. So most recently, this last week, we call it the COVID 3.5, but more money went out for small businesses. I'm told, and I fear, frankly, that the money's going to run out by next week. But it was $250 billion increase in the Paycheck Protection Program funds, which should go to small businesses. The difference between this most recent allotment and before is we carved out $60 billion of it that should be administered through community banks. And basically, because so many of our minority business owners and businesses bank with the community bank, we have banks that are, historically in the community, in the neighborhood, speak to the needs of the neighborhood, and don't necessarily have access to the SBA. And so we wanted to carve that out so that our true small businesses will seek protection and receive protection. I'm actually advocating in the next bill that there is a tranche that's carved out for any business that has 20 or fewer employees. It is my experience that most of our minority-owned businesses, they're small businesses, they're family-run businesses, less than 20 employees. Most of them are actually less than 10 employees. And they are part of the economic lifeblood of a community. And so we are fighting for them, but there's still a lot of work to be done because they're, like so many other minority-owned businesses, our AAPI businesses do not have an existing line of credit, right? They don't have an existing relationship with the big banks. And so we've heard the stories over and over again of these so-called small businesses who have big accounts, get the call from their big bank representative, hey, Joe, hey, Bob, let me help you out. And meanwhile, our minority-owned businesses are trying to navigate the website. So there's still a lot more work to be done in terms of what we need to do immediately. I'm saying now to everybody who's on this call, almost every congressional office has a liaison to the SBA, Small Business Association. So make sure in the next couple of days, because there's still time, that any small business that you know who does not have those relationships, that they're getting in touch with either their congressional representative or go on the SBA website so that they can get access to the funds that are left in the Paycheck Protection Program. And then we're going to need to fight in the next bill for a number of things, including more for that.
And too, on this, Representative, when we do think about the small businesses around, some folks are ordering in food more, at least in New York, where I'm at right now, to try to support these businesses. But we still have the underlying problem. Your thoughts here, Representative, on these small businesses that are AAPI owned?
I want to follow up on what Senator Harris said and make the point that the only reason there's $60 billion carved out for these small business and community development financial institutions is because Democrats in the Senate and the House held firm. You may have recalled that Republicans went on a 2-week pressure campaign to get us to simply say, fund this. And we're like, well, no, we don't want these hedge funds and big chain restaurants getting this money. We want to make sure it's going to the small businesses that need it. And it's because Democrats in both the Senate and House fought back that we were able to get that. And we also secured an additional $60 billion for economic injury disaster loans, which also can help small businesses. You did also mention hate crimes related to small businesses. And something I've been thinking about is we've seen this surge in hate crimes when we're on lockdown. So when lockdowns start lifting and you have economic activity resuming, I am fearful that you will see even more hate crimes when you have a lot more people out there who are not at home. So we'll see if that in fact happens. And that's why we all have to be very, very vigilant on make sure we tackle this hate crimes issue. And then on a going forward basis, I agree with Senator Harris, we need to absolutely change the language in the PPP to make sure that the very people who it's designed for, the small businesses, actually get it instead of these large businesses.
I want to finish with this question, and it's slightly personal, and I want to ask you this, and I'll start with you, Senator. Unfortunately, that's the cadence right now, which is what inspires you during this time to sit on this call right now to talk about this stuff? You could. There's certainly the American internment of Japanese Americans. There's certainly, when we think of the Chinese Exclusion Act, but you both as legislators are going to do something that's not like that. And you certainly have described that so far. But reflect on what personally is driving you to speak out on this right now. Certainly, you brought up the example of your mother in the past in public, Senator.
Look, I mean, I am the daughter of a mother who arrived in the United States alone when she was 19 years old, because she wanted to become a scientist and she wanted to study at what was considered to be one of the best schools. And my grandfather was so progressive that he let his eldest daughter, and we know what that means, the eldest child, he let his eldest child travel across the Atlantic to study. And as her eldest child, I watched how my mother was treated in her life. She had a heavy accent, and so people would assume things about her intelligence, when in fact, to this day, she is the smartest person I have ever known. I have an aunt who is living in Toronto, who she and her friends were, especially when Trump came in office, afraid when they were coming into the States from Toronto, afraid to travel by plane for fear that they'd be profiled by plane to travel because they were afraid they'd be profiled. I know, I have experienced hate crime. I know what it is. I know about the injustices that people in America face. And that's why I actually wanted to become a prosecutor. That's why I wanted to hold public office, to use my voice in a way that was about being a voice for the most vulnerable and often the most voiceless. And I just want to then close my comments with this. The AAPI Victory Fund has hosted us today. And this is about knowing the power of elections. Elections matter. Ted Lieu is able to do what he does in his brilliance in so many ways because he was elected, because people supported him, people supported me. And we right now have one of the biggest elections of our lifetime. And we have got to say goodbye to Donald Trump because he is not speaking to our better selves. And he is frankly dividing and destroying our country. And so I will tell you what inspires me to be on this call and what inspires me to do the work I'm doing every day in the course of just this pandemic is about knowing that the people of our country deserve to be lifted up by their elected leaders. They deserve to be seen. They deserve to be heard. They deserve that we speak truth no matter how uncomfortable it may make people, including speaking about things like hate crimes and racial disparities. But all with the purpose of getting us to a better place. But I would just urge everyone on this call, this election is going to be so important. We need to elect Joe Biden. The Senate races, Ted and Speaker Pelosi have done so well in terms of getting back the majority in the House of Representatives. We need to get the majority in the Senate so that these judges who have been awful as they're being appointed, who are trying to, gut precedent around civil rights, that we can win back the Senate and then get back to a place where we are collectively fighting for the ideals of our country.
Thank you, Senator. Representative?
Senator Harris, that was beautiful. Thank you for that. And by the way, thank you, Shekhar and AAPI Victory Fund for hosting us today as well. My story is the same as many of yours or your parents or your grandparents. I'm an immigrant. And when my parents looked at a map of America, they said, we're going to Cleveland. So that's where I grew up. And we were poor. They did not speak English well. And they went to flea markets to sell gifts and jewelry to make ends meet. Over many years, they were able to save their money, open one gift store in a shopping center. Then they worked 7 days a week, opened one gift store in a shopping mall. And my brother and I would help watch that store because we were free labor. But eventually they expanded to over 6 stores. And so in my mind, they achieved the American dream. They went from being poor to a home, gave my brother and I an amazing education. He's now a doctor. My parents still remind me of that. And it's also one reason I joined the US Air Force on active duty. I believe I can never get back to America. Everything this amazing country has given to me and my family. It's one reason I'm in politics, to make sure that this dream remains open for people who want to work hard and succeed. And we're one of the few countries in the world where immigrants of all walks of life and people of all races can participate in the American dream. And I'm on this call for the same reason Senator Harris is on this call, because we believe in the promise of America. And we believe in what America is and what it can be, and we're all trying to make it better. And all of you are on this call because you want to do the same thing as well.
Not a partisan moment, but I must say thank you both for your public service, and true to your final answers, you have followed through in what you do in life and day to day. Thank you both. A conversation with Senator Kamala Harris and Congressman Ted Lieu, a very difficult one, but one of solutions and positivity. And I thank you all for being here with us, as well as all of the participants that decided to join us today for this very, and this is a good thing, a very personal discussion today in front of our computers on a very important topic. So thank you both. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard.
All right. Have a good afternoon and a good evening. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.